This is a video that I've wanted to do for a long time on why asking the question, is it a sin to blank, is not a good idea to ask online. And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so I'm going to cover what you should do, why it's a bad idea, and kind of how to overcome this. So first we need to talk about why is it a bad idea? Why should you not go to Reddit, TikTok, wherever and ask the question, is it a sin to blank? And I've seen some pretty ridiculous ones. And I don't mean to call these ridiculous, but I've seen, is it a sin to draw God? Is it a sin to watch movies? Is it a sin to listen to music? And the reason why it's not good to ask these questions is, one, half the time the internet doesn't know what it's talking about. And I know that's ironic, me making a video telling you what to do, saying the internet doesn't know what it's talking about. I get the irony, it's not lost on me. But a lot of these questions are really important. When we're talking about religion, when we're talking about Catholicism, when we're talking about Christianity, we're potentially talking about your soul, your immortal soul, your relationship with God. These are big and important topics. So leaving it up to happen chance with the internet is not such a good idea. Not to mention, half the people will tell you yes and half the people will tell you no because they have different beliefs. Christianity is huge. There's literally millions, if not now billions of denominations, right? And each one believes something differently. So if you're asking, is it a sin to XYZ? Some Christians may say yes, some Christians may say no, and you've learned nothing. You've gained no knowledge from this, if nothing else than maybe just some confusion. So that's not really a helpful thing to ask if you're not even going to get a solid answer on it. Two, the big thing that I believe that is wrong about it is the idea of, if you get told the answer, you've learned nothing, right? Like, just like in school, if you just raise your hand and say, what's the answer to this? And someone says, it's 47. Okay, now you've got the right answer, maybe. But what have you done with it? Now, when you have the run to the same problem, you're going to get the same question, right? You didn't learn how to solve the problem. You didn't learn how to work through the math problem. You were simply given the answer. Same thing with sin. If you are just asking, is this a sin? Is this a sin? Is this a sin? Again, you may not get the right answer from the internet, but more importantly, you haven't learned how to get to the answer. Rather, you're just being told what it is. So when you run into a similar problem, you're going to be back at square one. You're just going to have to ask that question of, well, is this a sin? And you're going to be right back where you were. So rather than just asking for the answers, it's more important to learn how to answer the question for yourself so that you don't run into these problems. That's why a lot of people online who give the best answer to the question, I believe, is always speak with a priest, because the hope is that you'll go to the spiritual father and say, is this a sin? And they're not just going to give you the answer. They're going to say, well, let's examine your conscience. Let's talk about how to determine what is and is not sin and give you that skill set so you're not continually doing this. The final point I want to make on it is, what is a sin for one person may not be a sin for another person. And that gets into big, vague territory. And what I mean by this is, we say lying is a sin, so there are certain sins that are always a sin. But when we get into the nitty gritty, like, is watching a horror movie a sin? Well, one person can watch that horror movie and be unaffected by it. So it may not be a sin for them. Another person might watch that horror movie and have thoughts of like, ooh, I really want to try that witchcraft stuff. And for them, it may be a temptation or a sin. So there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for every person. Again, that's why it's important that you learn to examine your own conscience so that you can make those determinations for yourself. So that's what I hope to cover in this video. We've talked about why you don't want to ask, is this sin? So let's talk about, how do we do that examination of conscience? What is the best way to learn to do this for ourselves so, again, we're not relying on others? Well, first we have to determine, what is sin? And for this, I'm going to refer to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I believe it has the best definition of sin. So I'm just going to read directly from it here. Sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. It is a failure in genuine love for God and neighbor caused by a perverse attachment to certain goods. It has been defined by St. Augustine as an utterance, a deed, or a desire contrary to the eternal law. Sin is an offense against God. Sin sets itself against God's love for us and turns our hearts away from it. Like the first sin, it is disobedience or revolt against God through the will to become like God's, knowing and determining good and evil. Sin is thus love of oneself, even to the contempt of God. It's really, really good definition. Now, there is more if we're talking Catholic Church about venial sins and mortal sins. And while I am Catholic and like to preach from a Catholic perspective, for this video, I'm going to set that aside for now because I want this to be for everyone. We have a good definition of sin now. And in short, and this isn't the best definition, but to just cut it short, it's anything contrary to God. So, with that definition, it's a lot easier for us to ask the questions, well, is playing Pokemon contrary to God? Well, probably not. Now, if it makes you have thoughts about being contrary to God, or makes you want to, for whatever reason, fight animals or something, potentially. And that's where what's a sin for one person may not be a sin for another. To really determine that for yourself, we need to look at an examination of conscience. And for that, I am going to refer to bulldogcatholic.org. Check them out. They've got a wonderful, huge list of different things for you to be able to examine your conscience and go through it. And I'm going to read just a few of them directly from the website here to kind of give you an idea of how they do it. And the way they do it is first reference the 10 Commandments, right? The 10 Commandments are the big ones. Almost every single sin, if not every sin, is going to be in some way related to these commandments. Because again, these are the laws that God gave us. If sin is going against God, so if God says do these 10 things, then if we do something contrary to those, then obviously that is sin. So a couple examples, like for the first commandment, they say, ask yourself, have I reserved harbor hatred for God? Have I rejected my faith? Have I been involved in the occult? For the second commandment, you shall not take the name of the Lord of God in vain. Have I belittled others? Have I used vulgarity towards the church or at the church? Have I blamed God for my failings? Third commandment, remember to keep the holy Sabbath day. Have I intentionally missed Mass? Have I not been taking my children to Mass? Fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Have I ensured that my children still are under my care, frequently receive the sacraments and penance of the church? Have I been a good example to my children? Fifth commandment, you shall not murder. Have I unjustly and intentionally killed a human being? That one should be obvious. Hopefully no one watching this video is struggling with that one. Have I been guilty through negligence or lacking of attention to be the death of another human being, verbally or emotionally abused another person? So as you can see, this goes deep into each one of these commandments, and there's a big list. So again, bulldogcatholic.org has this big list for examining your conscience and going through it. And it's not going to have every single thing. And there are a lot of sins in our world, and it's not always a black and white topic. The one that is most hotly debated that I've seen is the idea of, can Catholics pirate media or pirate games? The idea of, can I go online and watch a movie through a streaming site if I don't pay for the movie? And people debate whether or not that piracy is actually stealing, because they say, well, no, in order to steal something, you have to take it from them and deny them access to it. Pirating is just making a copy of something. They still have access to it, so it's not really stealing. But on the other hand, you're accessing someone else's labor, someone else's goods without properly paying for it. So to me, that is theft. And that's a very hotly debated topic. If you go into the forums, you'll see people talking about piracy a whole lot. Modern day, and this is again why I say avoid those forums, LGBTQ rights and LGBTQ in general is a huge hot button issue across Christianity as a whole. And you'll see there are people on both sides of the argument. And so if you're not really well educated in this, you're not going to get a lot of fruitful endeavor from reading those conversations or being involved in those conversations. It is important, though, again, that we learn these tools to be able to examine our conscience and say, did I commit a sin through doing these things? It is also worth noting that there is too much. And I know that's going to sound a little bit strange, but there is a form of religious OCD, they call it. There is another word for it, scrupulosity, scruples, where people think that everything is a sin. And as you learn to identify sin and as you learn to develop your conscience, it's important that you don't go too far to the extreme. There are people who will read through this list and they're like, oh, well, every single thing I do is sin, and every day that I'm sinning because I'm not praying 24 hours a day. You know, I forgot to pray before I ate, so now I'm in mortal sin and I'm going to be judged to hell or condemned. Or, you know, I said bless you, but not God bless you, so I used the Lord's name in vain. It is possible to go too far with this. And again, that's why it's important to gain these tools to be able to really examine your conscience and say, is this something contrary to God? Unintentionally saying bless you instead of God bless you is not contrary to God. That is not defending the faith. That is not denying God. And there are people who struggle with this, and there are mental illnesses surrounding this. So again, that is why it's important to have these conversations with your spiritual advisor to work through these. If there is potential for mental illness or scrupulosities or religious OCD, perhaps an actual mental health professional should be involved in those conversations. I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I can't diagnose any of that. So I would defer to a professional to help you through those issues. An internet video isn't going to solve real mental illnesses. It's not going to solve real issues like that. Rather, this is just, again, meant to be a simple look into why you shouldn't be asking, is this a sin, and a way to start developing those tools for bettering yourself. And please, please, please do visit that spiritual advisor, visit that local Catholic priest, and ask these questions and start building these tools. When you go through the RCIA process or other processes into the church, they should also be giving you these tools to deal with it. We are humans. We are going to sin. We are going to fail. But it does us no good just to ask other people to judge it for us. We need to be able to judge it for ourselves and have that open and honest conversation with God and say, I fell short, I messed up. Or say, I did something here, but I don't think it actually was contrary to you. And be able to have those honest conversations. You know how people get annoyed with saying sorry all the time? I don't think God gets annoyed with that, but there's no need to apologize for, you know, God, I had cornflakes today and I should have had, you know, the other cereal because it would have honored you more. There is too far. So these honest conversations with yourself and God, these tools are very important for you to develop. If this has helped you, please make sure to like, subscribe, all that sort of thing. It does help the channel. I really appreciate that. Please drop any questions down below. I'll try and answer any questions I can. Again, I am not a lawyer. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose anything, and I'm certainly not a Catholic priest, so I don't have all the questions or all the answers to your questions, but I will do my best to answer questions, and if I can't answer them, then I will direct you to the right place to answer them. Thank you so much for your time, and have a blessed day.